Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Today I wanted to share some really important information with you if you are just getting out there in the homeschooling world. I'm going to share 15 mistakes that you really want to avoid. I've mentioned before that this is my 12th year homeschooling. I have graduated 3 homeschoolers. My oldest son graduated from public school, and then I'm homeschooling my 7 remaining school-age kids this year and through their own graduation. Over that time, I have made my share of mistakes. Believe me, I have made my share of mistakes. And I have also talked to some other homeschooling parents who have also made mistakes. And it happens. There's no such thing as a perfect homeschooling parent. But what I'm hoping to do today is at least to give you a heads up to some of the things that you want to watch out for so that you might not make the same mistakes that I made or maybe other people made as well. So let me just tell you what I've learned. So the first mistake, the first thing that you want to avoid is the overuse of textbooks. I know that when we think about school, we think about learning, we think of textbooks because that's how schools do things. But remember that you are homeschooling now, and also remember that textbooks really are not a good fit for learning for most children. So even though you might feel comfortable using a textbook, and I'm not telling you if you are comfortable using textbooks, what I am telling you is that you don't want to overuse them. Don't be afraid to maybe step away from them once in a while and maybe do some hands-on learning or some unit studies, or to go out there in the world and actually get a look at what it is like in real life instead of just on the pages of that textbook. So remember, just because school uses textbooks does not mean that you have to. In fact, if you don't like textbooks, like I don't like textbooks, you don't have to use them at all. So the second thing that I've learned is that you really want to avoid the insistence of following the lesson plans. I have talked about this several times because I'm a planner. So when I first started out homeschooling, I made up all these little plans and they looked so cute in my little planner, and I even planned out for like a full year ahead of specifically what we were going to do. But what ended up happening was that life would happen, life would get in the way, and instead of me just shifting things and maybe moving them to a different day, or maybe just weighing the benefits or disadvantages of doing them and maybe just tossing some things out if they weren't that important, instead what I did was I insisted that we get it done, and sometimes I would either triple up our work, double up our work, or sometimes I would even make my kids work on Saturdays. So yeah, I was pretty bad about it at first. I was like a homeschool tyrant. I wanted to make sure that I stuck to that schedule. What ended up happening was that I burned out, my kids burned out, and we completely lost the spark in our learning with our whole family. It was not fun anymore, and it's because of one thing that I think a lot of people forget. Real learning does not happen only within the confines of your lesson plan. Real learning happens in the day-to-day happenings, what your children are experiencing, what they are doing, what they are seeing. It is not just whatever is within the pages of their activities for the day. So the third thing that you want to avoid is long, tedious lessons. This is another thing that I think a lot of homeschooling parents, especially those who have just started out, think that because a period in school is typically about 50 to 55 minutes, depending on what school you're at. So they happen to think that their subjects in their homeschool have to be 50 to 55 minutes. But what I can tell you is this: when you were in school, did your teacher have your attention for that whole 50 to 55 minutes? Probably not, unless it was a subject that you were like completely in love with. Because I have to admit, I loved learning Greek mythology. I had Greek mythology as an elective. And so yeah, in that case, the teacher did have my full attention. So if you have a child who has an intense interest in the subject and that you know that they're okay with you going on for 50 minutes about it, then do it. But the fact is that your subjects don't have to be 50 to 55 minutes long. Very typically, depending on your child's age, the younger kids, you might have their attention for about 10 minutes. And after that, you might start to lose them. Once you lose them, you can bet that they're not really going to be retaining much of what you're doing anyway. Older kids might be a little bit longer than that, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes possibly for a high schooler. But remember, long, tedious lessons do not equal more learning. A lot of times they equal less learning because your child is getting bored, they're getting overstimulated, and they're just getting plain tired out. So the next thing that you really need to avoid is actually related to that, and that's drill and kill. Drill and kill is very often related to math. So there are a lot of math curriculums that seem to think that your child has to do 50 long division problems a day in order for them to understand the concept of long division, or 50 multiplication with carrying, or just name anything. 40 word problems. And the thing is that just as with those long, tedious problems, you're going to have your child for, I would say, about, okay, I won't say your child, I'll tell you my child. With my child, if there were 50 problems on that page, that would be like a no-go for them. I would probably start out circling maybe about 15 of them, possibly 10, depending on what kind of, if they were really long, drawn-out problems, and I would gauge them from there. Your kids don't need to be doing 50 long division problems in order for them to understand it. Do you know why so many kids hate math? That's a large reason why kids hate math. It is drilled and drilled and drilled into them to the point that they can't even stand the sight of it. Yes, give your kids practice in math, but don't overdo it. So the next thing that you want to avoid is going overboard with unit studies, which I have been known to do from time to time. Now, unit studies are when you take a topic and that you explore that topic really deeply and that you cover all of the subject areas with it. If you don't know what a unit study is, I'll leave a link in the description box to a video or a few videos that will explain to you better what unit studies are. But suffice it to say that you can easily go overboard with a unit study. You might have chosen a topic that your child was really interested in and that you were really interested in, but over time, maybe you have been working at it for like 4 weeks, and you notice that your child's interest is waning in that unit study topic. Or if you yourself as the parent find that you're not really too excited about it anymore, your child is going to pick up on that. So I want you to remember that if a unit study is just not of interest to your child anymore, you don't have to finish it. There's no law. I always say this. There's no curriculum police that are going to knock at your door if you don't finish something. Unit studies do not have to be finished to the end. So if you find that it's just not working, if the interest is no longer there, just stop doing it and move on to something else. So the next thing that you want to avoid, this is number 6, by the way, is turning everything into a lesson. Yeah, I've been known to do that because there are so many cool things out there in the world. As you're taking your kids for walks, you might notice the squirrels gathering nuts, or you might notice the different types of trees. You might notice the birds that are out there. And it can be really, really easy to take every single thing that you observe with your kids and try to turn it into a homeschooling lesson. But this is one of those things where if you say something to your child and they seem interested, maybe about the squirrel, you might want to say something else about why they're gathering nuts. If they seem interested, okay, then you can say something else. But what I have tended to do is I will start droning on and on and on, because sometimes I get to the point where I'm always thinking of being a homeschool mom, and I'm not thinking of being just a mom. A mom that doesn't have to be thinking about lesson plans and about what's going to be getting written down on, the log of the things that they had to do that day. Sometimes it's okay to be a mom. Sometimes it's okay to not turn everything that happens into a lesson. Okay, so the 7th thing is actually pretty similar to my unit study one. And so what you want to avoid is insisting on finishing a curriculum. Just as with unit studies, you don't have to finish a curriculum. Now, with unit studies, you might decide to stop doing it just because the interest is no longer there. With curriculum, the reason for not finishing it might be different. So a lot of curriculums are written for 36 weeks because a lot of states require 36 weeks or 180 days of school. And so a lot of curriculum companies, they write to that specific school calendar year. But the thing is that if you're really honest about it, you will never have 180 complete days of homeschool of days that were never interrupted, where your plans never had changed, where your kids never got sick. So you need to keep that in mind as you are completing these 36-week lesson plans. Those 36 weeks were not written for all those things that might come up. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of times that you don't finish the curriculum by the end of the year. And that is totally okay. In addition, now I've noticed that there are some curriculums that maybe only give you a plan for like 30. And I've actually talked before that you don't even have to follow the plan of the curriculums. You can actually tweak it and make it fit your family. I don't even follow the plans that are given by different curriculums, but again, that's another video entirely. But even if they're written for 30 weeks, sometimes you might find that you still are not able to get it done. Why? Well, in addition to those sick days or maybe field trips or when you have other activities planned, the benefit of homeschooling is that if your child does not understand a concept, they don't have to go on and move on to the next lesson the next day. You can decide to take it more slowly. You can let them spend, 3 weeks on long division instead of the 3 days that your math curriculum gives you. You can decide that you're going to, if one of your curriculums has too many problems on it, like a math one, it's usually math that has too many problems in it, assign your kids half of the problems. If they have a hard time completing those, if they just don't understand, have them complete the next half the next day. So does that mean that you're going to be behind in your curriculum? Well, yeah, if you're going by their plan, but what you need to remember is that the people who are writing these curriculums, they don't know your children. They don't know your children's needs. They don't know your family's needs. You do. So if you don't finish your curriculum, don't worry about it, because as I mentioned before, most of the true learning that happens with your children is going to happen outside of those lessons that you're doing with them. And I know it's hard for me to say that because I put like my heart and soul into trying to think of things that my kids are going to like, doing these activities with my kids. It's a pride thing. It's hard for me to admit that, but it really is true. No matter what I put into our lessons, the fact is that they are going to learn far more when we are not doing homeschooling, because that is when they are actually out there learning just practical life things that are going to have an immediate effect on them. Does it mean that they're not, that none of the learning that they're doing in their homeschool is important? Absolutely not. It is so important that you educate your children. But I want you to remember is that a lot of schools, a lot of educators, a lot of families in general, they don't put enough importance on those general life skills that kids really do need. Those are the most important things for your kids to learn. And again, it's not going to happen from any curriculum. Okay, so the 8th thing that you want to avoid when it comes to homeschooling, and this is not something that I have ever personally done, but I've talked to people who have done this, is to not allow your child to have enough free time. I know of homeschooling families who used to spend 6 hours a day on their homeschool lessons, and then they might go to piano lessons right afterwards. And then after piano lessons would be softball, and then after softball would be youth group. And while a lot of homeschoolers really do think that it's important to completely fill up their kids' schedule with activities, even when they're not doing homeschool, they want to just have those extracurriculars just packed in there. The thing is that kids really do need free time, just like adults need free time. And again, this is going back to the most learning that they're going to do. Letting them have time to actually do the things that they enjoy, letting them have time to follow their own interests is so much more beneficial than completely packing their schedule. And on top of that, it's going to give you less anxiety as a parent because you don't have to juggle everything, especially if you have more than one child. So the 9th thing that you want to avoid is not giving your child input on what they learn about. You know, again, one of the biggest benefits of homeschooling is being able to ask your kids, what do you want to learn about? What do you want to know more about? A lot of times when kids are in school, they might have an intense interest in snakes, but they might not actually learn about snakes until, say, 2 years later. And then when they finally get on the snakes aspect of science, they learn about them for like 2 or 3 days, and then it's done. So they waited all that time, and it's kind of anticlimactic because they only spent 2 days on the thing that they were waiting for. That's one of the beauties of homeschooling, is really taking advantage of your child's curiosity and asking them what they want to learn about, because then they have a stake in it, because they know that not only are they learning about something that they're interested in, but they also know that you as the parent respect them and respect the things that they are curious about. Okay, and the next one, number 10, actually, you know what I just realized is that number 9, I said not giving your child input on what they learn about, actually ties right in with number 10, not taking your child's interest seriously. This actually does tie in right with number 9. I didn't even realize it before. But a lot of times, for example, the things that your kids might be interested in might not exactly be what you as a parent think of as worthwhile learning. Because again, we as parents, we tend to put things like in academic and leisure. And sometimes the things that your kids want to learn about are those leisure times. And it can be hard for us to understand that everything is educational. Everything has value. So even if your child wants to learn about something that you particularly don't think would fit into, you know, a subject area, it doesn't mean that it's not worth your kids learning. My daughter, who just graduated, when she was around 12 or 13, she really grew interested in theatrical makeup. She grew interested in learning how to make her own makeup, and she started doing little tutorials on how to do this theatrical makeup. And you know, a lot of homeschooling parents might look at something like that and think, that's not something that we're going to include in our homeschool. She can do that in her free time. But me as the parent, I saw all of the research that she was putting into this, and I completely understood that she was learning more from this than if I would give her something that she really didn't care about. Is this something that I automatically was able to differentiate? No. It took me years of deschooling myself to finally get to the point where I realized that just because something wouldn't fit on a school syllabus doesn't mean that it's not worth your child learning about. So number 11, the 11th thing that you want to avoid when it comes to homeschooling is not taking your child's learning style into consideration. So even if you are doing something that your kids are interested in, if you are doing it in a way that just doesn't fit how they learn, you're not going to get out of it what you could if you would actually observe your child, pay attention to how they do things, and just kind of work that into it. If you have a child who really has an aversion to textbooks, teaching them something, even if they enjoy it through a textbook, will probably not get the most learning into them. That probably doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean. As like, for example, if they are very visual, so maybe if you would show them documentaries, or if maybe you would even take them out on field trips to see things, or maybe if you would let them do it, like learn about things and sketch them or write reports on them. It all depends. There are so many different ways for kids to learn. The best way for you to do that is just for you to understand how your kids learn is just watch them. See how they do things. Do they like to draw a lot? Are they readers? Do they like to watch documentaries? Or have they expressed a preference for textbooks? Follow them and do what works best for them. The 12th thing that you want to avoid when it comes to homeschooling, we're getting close. Remember, there's only 15. So the 12th thing is refusing to ever go with the flow. And this very easily ties in with the whole planning aspect. If you are so dead set on making sure that your homeschool time is only filled with homeschooling activities, that you aren't going to open the door to other opportunities that might come in, you're going to regret that in your later years. So even though you might have an unexpected visitor, while you are in the midst of your homeschool studies. If it's someone that you haven't seen in a while, you don't need to turn them away and tell them, well, we're homeschooling right now. Take advantage of that. As I mentioned before, there is learning to be found in everything. Don't be afraid to go with the flow. Don't be afraid to write down those activities that you want to do with your kids, and then the next day comes, you're all prepared to do whatever it is that you had planned, and then someone calls and says, hey, do you want to take your kids to the water park with me today? Don't be afraid to just drop everything for that day and say, yes, let's go for it. You don't have to do this all the time, but you have to give yourself the flexibility to do this at least once in a while. So, the 13th thing that you want to avoid when it comes to homeschooling, and this is a tough one, is you want to try to avoid being impatient with your kids. This is hard for me. I have 7 kids who are still homeschooling, and out of those 7 kids, I would say that 6 of them are very, very high energy, bouncing off the walls all the time, constantly doing things. And even though I might not have a baby, I might not have a toddler at this point in time, there are still times that my house is very intense. My youngest is 7, and so the ones that are homeschooling are 16, 14, 13, 12, 10, 9, and 7. And yeah, my house gets really intense, even though I don't have little ones anymore. I consider my 7-year-old little, but you know what I mean. I don't have any toddlers or babies. So yeah, I do lose patience with my kids once in a while, but the thing is that you want to try to control it. You don't want to let it get the best of you, because if your child is worked up because you are constantly being impatient with them, it is going to impede their learning. Mark my words, if you find yourself getting stressed out to the point that you know an explosion is coming, take a step outside, take a deep breath, maybe change the activity that you're doing, and just think twice about it. And again, I am not pretending to be like an angel in this, because it is still hard for me. Even though I've been a mom for almost 27 years now, this is still hard for me, and it's still something that I work on every day. So the 14th mistake that you want to avoid is assuming that learning can't be fun. This is something that a lot of old timers believe. I've heard a lot of older people say things like, well, if they're having fun, then they're not learning. And to me, it is just completely opposite. But believe it or not, there are still people who think that the most serious and the most not fun, I don't want to say boring, but they just think that if your kids are spending their time doing serious studies, serious works, that is going to somehow have a more benefit than if you are doing, fun activities, and if you are making your kids learn in a way that is going to keep their interest more. Now, is learning fun all the time? No. You really want to be careful about that. If you try to make learning fun all the time, your kids might have a problem when they come to a point in time as they're older doing things that are not so fun. And that is why I think it's really important to differentiate. Yes, make your kids learning fun as much as you can, whenever you can, but don't avoid things just because they're not fun, especially if they're things that you know that your kids have to learn. Like, I still have kids, even though we really like CTC math, I still have kids who don't really like math, especially certain things about math. Like, I have some kids who don't like fractions. I have some kids who don't like division. And if I would say to them, well, you know what, since you don't find that fun, we're just not going to do it, that's not helpful to them. But the point of this is that you've got to remember that learning can be fun, and if you can make it fun, do it. And the 15th thing that you want to avoid is ignoring the signs of burnout. If you get to the point in your homeschool year where you find that you are losing patience with your kids a lot, that you just really have no interest in maybe even starting your homeschool day with them or completing the homeschool day, if you're not excited about the things that you're doing with them, even though you might have been really excited when you were planning them out, it might be a time to just take a little bit of a break. You know, if it's something that is just minor, maybe you can just have a movie day or go to the playground, or maybe you could even just, you know, let your kids play that day and you could just relax as the parent. If it's something that is a little bit more severe, you might want to take a few days off and just allow yourself and your kids time to rest. Because if you try to push yourself too hard through a period of burnout, it becomes so tempting to want to give up, and it is not worth it. I'm telling you, as a mother who burned out after the first 2 years of homeschooling, I sent my kids to school, back to school, for 2 years before I pulled them out again. Those 2 years that they spent in school, I regret every day that happened. So if you feel the burnout coming, give yourself time to rest. Nip it in the bud. Don't let it go. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram because YouTube disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.